I don't have enough money right now to simultaneously pay off my debts, build up an investing portfolio, start a business, and maintain a decent quality of life. And so that means that I'm not going to be able to pay off my debts anytime soon, and I need to learn to live with it. Now, my outstanding debts mainly consist of a student loan and a mortgage, both of which are relatively low interest. The student loan's at around 2.45% and the mortgage is at around 2%. Now for the mortgage, learning to live with it is not so hard. And there's a couple of reasons why that's the case, even though the amount of debt that I have in the mortgage is over 10 times higher than all of the other debts that I have combined. The reasons why having a mortgage doesn't cause me stress and anxiety on a daily basis are, first of all, it's going to be paid over such a long time horizon that I just really can't dedicate any mental space towards it here and now. Secondly, my mortgage payments take the place of my previous rent payments, so it doesn't appear to be a new drain on my bank account or on my resources. And actually, less of my mortgage payment is a sunk cost than my rent payments were. So on net, since I'm building up equity in the home, it's not so bad. Now, when it comes to the student loan payment, there's a couple reasons why I feel more motivated to attack it and pay it off aggressively. And first of all, it's a new drain on my resources because I only started having to make payments on the student loan once I graduated. And secondly, it seems actually more manageable to pay off in the short to medium term because it's a much smaller total amount. And so that motivates me to want to take more money and throw it towards the student loan. But as I examined in a previous video, link up here, paying off debt is not always going to be the optimal allocation of any extra cash. And sometimes you can earn a much higher rate of return by taking that money and investing it, especially if the interest rate on the debt is low, as is my student loan interest rate. So I've learned to live with my student loans as well. I've come to the realization that while there's definitely a motivating psychological element to wanting to pay down debt and then achieve that sort of snowball effect where you start with the small debts and then you work your way up to the big ones, and then before you know it, it's all gone. But allocating all of my extra cash towards the student loan is not going to be the optimal allocation of those resources. And I know that. So if I ever find myself just second guessing why I've made the decisions that I've made, I just need to revisit those interest rate calculations and remind myself why I know that paying off the debt is not necessarily going to be the best choice in the short or the long term. And in addition to those rationalizations that I've made about living with debt, there's another important part to this equation, which is that if I hadn't assumed that debt, if I hadn't taken out student loans or taken out a mortgage, I wouldn't have been able to make those massive investments in my future that I think is actually going to pay off much, much more in the long run than whatever the interest I'm going to be charged on those loans is. Take the student loan, for instance. I wouldn't have been able to finish my undergraduate degree if I hadn't taken out a student loan. I wouldn't have been able to cover the cost of tuition and housing and books, etc. And so by using debt as a tool, it allowed me to make that massive investment in my future. Once I graduated from that undergraduate program, I went on and got a master's degree and then graduated and was able to get a really well-paying job, which over the course of my lifetime working in that job is going to earn me much, much more than I will be paying in interest on those student loans. So those loans were a tool that I was able to leverage for my future benefit. And the same thing applies with housing. When I took out a mortgage to buy this property, this condo here with my fiance, I knew that it was going to be a huge amount of debt, but we wouldn't have been able to purchase this place and invest in this real estate otherwise, because we would have had to wait for years, probably decades, before we saved up enough actual cash to buy this place without a loan. And so as we were waiting over those years and decades, we would have missed out on all of the appreciation that this property is definitely going to go through in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, who knows. And so in that case as well, assuming the debt allowed us to make this investment in our future, which we wouldn't have otherwise been able to make. And actually, when you compare these sunk costs to buying a home and paying that mortgage interest versus the sunk cost of renting, which is just paying rent, it's not necessarily going to be all that different. But in this instance, you're able to invest in an asset class that over time is proven to have really steady, stable growth. I've actually posted another video on this topic, which I'll link up here if you're interested in that comparison between renting versus buying. And for all these reasons, I've learned to be comfortable living with debt, even though it's not something that came natural to me. But I do think that if used properly and treated with respect, debt can be a very useful tool, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.